up-and-coming, but still relatively minor power. But after the wars, they were indisputably the most powerful state in the Western Mediterranean. The First Punic War was the longest continuous war in Greek and Roman history, and included a naval battle that may have involved more participants than any other in all of history. The Second Punic War featured Rome's greatest foe and one of the most brilliant generals of all time, Hannibal Barca, who possibly killed more Romans in one day than any other enemy of Rome did, and whose dazzling tactics are still emulated today. The year 264 BC was a fateful one for Rome, since in that year Rome captured the last remaining Italian city, and also got enmeshed in its first overseas war. This was the First Punic War, which was fought against the city of Carthage. Rome and Carthage would eventually fight a series of 3 wars, which the Romans would call the Punic Wars because Carthage had begun as a Phoenician colony, and in Latin, the adjective punicus means Phoenician. Like Rome, Carthage was in charge of a rapidly expanding empire, and by the mid-3rd century BC was Rome's main rival in the Western Mediterranean. Also, like Rome, Carthage was fortunate in being located in an important strategic position. The city was on the coast of North Africa, with a good harbor right at the bottleneck where the Mediterranean was the narrowest, around Sicily. Thus, Carthage could command all sea travel going from east to west, and so was situated in perhaps even a better position than Rome to ultimately dominate the Mediterranean. According to legend, the city of Carthage had been founded around 750 BC as a trading outpost of the Phoenician city of Tyre. But Carthage had eventually broken away and set up its own empire, bringing most of the local North African tribes under its command. Unlike Rome, Carthage did not incorporate its conquered territories or share any degree of citizenship with their inhabitants, but instead, Carthage forced defeated states to pay tribute to them. By the time of the outbreak of the First Punic War, Carthage held the entire coastline of North Africa, from modern Libya to Morocco. A scattering of Carthaginian outposts stretched southward along the Atlantic coast of Africa, while Carthaginian settlements were also founded in Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and the Balearic Islands. While the early Romans were primarily farmers, the Carthaginians were merchants. Especially lucrative was Carthage's control over regions with rich mineral resources. Mines in Spain and Sardinia yielded valuable metals, including silver, copper, and iron. Carthaginian merchants established trade networks with Britain, which gave them access to tin, a rare but highly valued resource in the Mediterranean. Intrepid Carthaginian merchants and mariners such as Hanno the Navigator even passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and explored down the west coast of Africa. From these voyages, as well as from land trade routes down into Africa, the Carthaginians were able to obtain gold, ivory, and even elephants, which were trained and incorporated into the Carthaginian army. Carthage maintained a large merchant fleet and carried out an active trade in both staples and luxury items all over the Mediterranean. Compared to Rome, the number of Carthaginian citizens was small. So when they needed an army, they would use their wealth to hire mercenaries, and would also recruit soldiers from the indigenous tribes in the territories that they controlled. Libyans were recruited as skirmishers, Spanish tribesmen as heavy infantry, and Numidians, who were famous for their skill as horsemen, formed effective light cavalry contingents. The war elephants of the Carthaginian army were African elephants, smaller in size than the Indian elephants employed by the more eastern Hellenistic kingdoms. The Carthaginian war elephant stood about 8 feet high at the shoulder and carried a rider who directed them in battle, but probably not the small towers containing archers or javelin throwers that were mounted on Indian elephants. The commanders and officers of the army were drawn from the Carthaginian nobility, but the masses of soldiers were almost entirely non-citizens. The permanent army tended to be small, with levies only being raised in times of conflict. The most potent arm of the Carthaginian military was its navy. To protect their merchant ships, they maintained what was probably one of the largest and most powerful fleets of warships in the Mediterranean at that time. The port of Carthage boasted a large naval base, the centerpiece of which was a vast circular structure that could contain the hulls of 180 warships perched on launching ramps. Elaborate support facilities surrounded this naval arsenal with storehouses for timber, rope, caulking, and sails, and dockyards to construct new vessels. The political system of Carthage was technically a sort of mixture of oligarchy and democracy that superficially had a number of similarities with Rome, including a senate, elected magistrates, and a supreme court or council of 104 judges. However, true power resided in the hands of a small group of wealthy merchant families who dominated these offices. The Carthaginians maintained the religious practices of their Phoenician ancestors, even sending representatives each year to offer sacrifices at the Temple of Melkart in Tyre. They also seem to have clung to some rituals, even after they had been abandoned in their homeland. Most notably, the custom of sacrificing infants to the gods Baal, Hammon, and Tanit. Excavations of religious precincts at Carthage suggest that this gruesome ritual continued all the way down to 146 BC. The chief priests tended to hold high offices, and thus there was a close association between political and religious affairs in Carthage. Prior to the First Punic War, Rome and Carthage already had a long history of relatively amicable diplomatic relations. Over the previous 250 years, they had signed a sequence of 3 treaties with one another, acknowledging each other's respective zones of influence and pledging non-interference within those. By 264 BC, the problem was that each side had expanded to the point where direct conflicts of interest between them were becoming unavoidable. Looking at a map of the Mediterranean reveals that friction between the expanding empires of Rome and Carthage was inevitable. Geography also seems to dictate the place that their interests would overlap and that would become the source of conflict. Both naturally wished to possess the vital sea straits that passed to the north and south of the island of Sicily. Whoever controlled these waters would have a stranglehold on all east-west trade in the Mediterranean. In addition, Sicily was home to a number of particularly wealthy cities, mostly founded by Greek colonists. And whoever could bring these cities under their control would reap substantial economic benefits. Another economic issue was that the Romans may have felt an obligation to protect the trading interests of the former Greek cities in southern Italy, which were now their allies and were losing out to Carthaginian merchants. Also factoring into the underlying causes of the First Punic War was the just-ended long series of conflicts that Rome had fought against its fellow Italians. These had left the Romans with an almost paranoid fear of powerful neighbors. Finally, many ambitious aristocrats would favor almost any war, which they viewed as a chance to to gain military glory and thereby increase their all-important dignitas. The two sides in the First Punic War offer an interesting set of similarities and contrasts. Both Rome and Carthage were founded at roughly the same time, and they were both young, vigorous, growing, expansionist empires. Despite these similarities, their differences were even more pronounced. Rome's military strength was its army, composed of citizen, soldier, farmers. Carthage's was its navy, while its army was heavily dependent on mercenaries and conscripted foreign tribes. Rome was predominantly an agrarian society, whereas Carthage was ruled by wealthy merchants. And Rome had at least a notionally democratic republic, but Carthage was an oligarchy. Often, great wars are sparked by seemingly minor and unpredictable incidents, perhaps most famously illustrated when the assassination in Sarajevo of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by a Serbian nationalist initiated a chain reaction leading to the cataclysm of World War I. While the true underlying causes of the Punic Wars lay in the fundamentally geography-based rivalry between Rome and Carthage, the immediate cause in this instance had to do with the actions of a band of mercenaries known as the Mamertines. Originally from the region of Campania in Italy, they took their name from the Italic god Mamers, a version of the Roman god of war Mars. The Mamertines had been hired as mercenaries by the ruler of Syracuse, the wealthiest and most powerful city in Sicily. This ruler had used them to help capture another Sicilian city, Messana. During a period of political instability in Syracuse, the Mamertines abandoned their employer and opportunistically seized control of Messana, murdering many of the Messenians in the process, and then launching raids into Syracusan territory. Once a new, dynamic Syracusan leader arose, the Mamertines feared retribution for their earlier actions. Accordingly, they sought a